You can take box cuttings right up until the end of November. And in this Q&A session, filmed for the Telegraph, I show how remarkably simple it is to do. We've had a pre-submitted question on this, and this is from George. And George said he's fed up with box blight. Is there anything you can do? Now, it's funny that George should say that, because I planted out this garden with 1,000 box plants about 33 years ago, before I'd even heard of box blight, and certainly way before it sort of became big. And I took 1,000 cuttings from a garden in London, rooted them up. I took them about this time of year, rooted them up, they rooted up by about spring, planted out the liners, and in a couple of years I had lovely thick box hedges, and I loved them. But it did mean I had to spray them to keep the blight at bay, because our winters are getting wetter, it seems. It just got so wet and the blight just took hold. And I could keep it in check by spraying with Signum, with Buxus and things like that. But it's just a chore. You just don't want to have to be doing that. And then I found out about Didier Hermans. Now, Didier Hermans is a Belgian grower, and he grows a lot of box. And he started a new program to actually find a blight-resistant box. So in 2007, he sowed 10,000 seedlings. And bearing in mind that it takes a year to germinate a box plant from a seed, that's a lot of box seeds. And then after about a few years, I think it was something like 2015, he'd narrowed those 10,000 plants down to 150 plants, which he thought were promising against box blight, having that resistance. And he did this by completely hammering them and spraying them with box blight spores. And so he could see those that really tolerated the blight and those that succumbed. And then come 2020, so you can see it's a long lead in time from the start in 2007, he narrowed it down to the Fab 4. And I ripped out all my old box hedges, it was about last March, and I planted up with Didier Hermans, with one of his, and I planted out Heritage. And these new plants that you can see all around me now have grown since last March, and they're forming a nice little hedge. I haven't clipped them yet, but I will. But the other ones that Didier did, he did, of the 4, he's got this one, which is Skylight. Now this is meant to be a more erect plant, so it's perfect for topiary. You can see here, the leaves look slightly sparser perhaps than a traditional box, but it is definitely box. It's a very good plant apparently if you want topiary, because it does grow pretty fast. Then there's this one, which is Renaissance. And this is the one that they recommend if you want low box hedges, either this or Heritage. You just have to clip it once a year. It's what they call broidery in Holland, when you have sort of pattern work of box. And Renaissance is one that's meant to be very good for that. And then finally, there's this one, this other box blight resistant one, which is called Babylon. Is it Babylon? Babylon Beauty. And you can see this has got a different habit, hasn't it? It's slightly prostrate. So this is a very good ground cover plant if you want a mass of low ground cover. And I imagine it forms just a completely flat mass when it's had time to get going. Now, they're excellent plants, I think, and I think they really are going to revolutionise box, because a lot of people are going off using box totally because of this and because of the box moth. We haven't yet got the box moth. I'm sure we will get it, but there are things that you can spray at. There are actually biological controls that you can use to control box moth. So I'm not particularly worried. When that comes here, I'm just going to use a biological control and that will be fine. And you spray, I think, once or twice a year. Anyway, so I'm now going to remove a lot more of the other box in my garden, and I'm going to replace it. And so in order to do that, I'm going to take box cuttings. Now, obviously, because this is a patented plant, it has got plant breeders' rights. So when you spend that time, that money, that investment on breeding a new plant, you obviously don't let people just take cuttings and sell it. So when any plant has plant breeders' rights on it, you can propagate it for your own use, but you can't propagate it up to sell. So I'm going to actually propagate some of all of these and just try them out, because I'd like to try big areas of them just to see how they look. But for today, I'm going to take Renaissance. Now, before I start actually taking the cuttings, I'm going to show you what medium I use. So I usually do my cuttings in these trays. So these are just my polystyrene trays. They have no base, which I really like, because when you turn them upside down, you can see if the roots are coming through or not. So you very quickly have an idea how well they're rooting. But when I actually fill it with compost, I just put this polystyrene board underneath so the compost doesn't drop out. Now, if you can't get those, which you probably can't because they're no longer made, and I inherited them from my mum, Charles Dowding has made these cell trays for sowing vegetables in. But because, again, they've got nice big bottoms, holy bottoms, which I really like, so they drain freely and they seem to aid rooting. And he's done them in all sorts of sizes, bigger than this and smaller than this. So I'd recommend that you got some of those online. And also, they look like, to me, they would last for 30, 40, 50 years. I think they'd do you a lifetime, unlike the polystyrene, which has probably done about 20 years, but it is a bit worse for wear. Now, when I take cuttings, a box, you take the semi-hardwood cuttings. These are sort of just, you can just see the wood is just starting to lignify, just starting to get a little bit brown. So with cuttings, you have the softwood cuttings that you usually take earlier on the summer, which is all a very soft greeny growth. And then at this time of year, and you can take these from September to November really, and if you take the cuttings now, they should be rooted by spring, if not sooner. And so you take these cuttings, but before I do that, I'm just going to fill the tray. Now, you can use perlite or you can use vermiculite. Vermiculite's slightly more yellowy colour. This is perlite. They both are very good products. You tend to use a vermiculite more, perhaps if you've got plants that like a wetter substrate, because it holds the water a bit differently. I want a mix of half of the perlite, half of the multi-purpose compost. All it is doing is helping open the compost, so it just makes it more free draining, which is what you want. And then I'm just going to mix it up. And I always like to wet my compost before I sow seeds, take cuttings or anything, because compost is quite difficult to wet. When it comes out of the bag, it's often really dry. And then I'm going to put it on my old favourite. And I usually do this, and I'll do, a fair few trays at a time. So I'll have a barrow completely full of compost and loads of trays at the ready. So I'll push it in roughly like that, and then I just push them down. And it does go in. You want it quite firm in those trays, so it stays in well. That one's broken, so it won't do it. And you quickly firm them through, top them up where necessary. And then you come to the exciting part, which is actually taking the cutting material. Now, as I said before, you really want to make sure the plant that you are taking the cutting from is in good health and growing well. If it's a sad, sickly old thing, it just probably won't do. So then I'll lift them both up. Those look nice, pop them there. And then I'm going to take cuttings of the Renaissance. Now, when you're doing cuttings, for a box, you'll take cuttings that are about 3 to 6 inches long. Okay, now obviously if you've got loads of plants and you're not short of material, you'll probably go for 6-inch one. It doesn't make much difference, you just get a bit of a head start. If you haven't got much material, then you'll use everything you've got. Now this one, I'm just pulling it away. And I don't know if you can see that, but that's with a heel, slight heel, because I just pulled it off from the main stem. Now, with some plants, it's important that you take them with a heel, and with some plants, it doesn't matter. And box is one of those that it doesn't matter. And then I just pull off a few leaves. Now, when you're taking any cutting, you usually do that because they lose the moisture through the leaves. So when you've got big floppy leaves, I'll maybe cut the leaves in half and remove quite a few, because you don't want them to dry out before they root. And then having got that little cutting, I'll just stick it in there and just sort of nicely firm it in. So I'm not using any hormone rooting powder. Hormone rooting powder is used for things that are a bit more tricky. It also has a fungicide in there, so it stops them rotting. I hardly ever use it because it has a very short shelf life, and it's expensive. And I find most things root without it. So then I'll go on and I'm going to take just a few more. So I'm going to pull this one off again. And I've got a nice wee tiny one there with a heel from a side shoot. Now, if the sun was streaming down today and I was taking a slightly softer wood cutting than box, I wouldn't be doing it in the sunlight because obviously that's going to dry them out. But it's a pretty autumnal day today. Now, out of this one, I've got a longer one and I'm going to split it in two. So I'll get 2 bits. I could, if I was mean, get it out 3. So just cut it in half. Make sure you put them in the right way up. That would be a bad mistake if you put it in upside down. Pull them off and then in they go. Well, that one's a bit of a duff one, so I'll put it in there. Lovely. And when I've done the whole tray, I'll just do a few more. I'll just probably, oh, there's a nice little side shoot again. Now you could, you see that's got a better heel on it. It's got a little thing from where it's come off the plant. And that, I don't know why, but for some reason I always prefer plants with heels, but it's totally rational. I don't think it makes any difference as to how they root. It's got a nice little heel too. And for me, it doesn't matter if they're not uniform size cuttings. So some are bigger and some are smaller. But if you go to a commercial nursery, my mum had a commercial nursery, and she had a big misting polytunnel. And when you saw her thousands of cuttings all laid out, they'd all be very similar, the size of the cuttings and everything, because they are into producing uniform batches of plants. That's what she would sell on to the garden centres and like. But with me, I don't mind if I've got some diddly ones and some bigger ones. It really doesn't matter. I'll prune them all and sort them out anyway later on in the day. And in her misting house, she'll have mist jetting over the plants at regular intervals. The tunnel was shut at either end usually, so it built quite a fug up in there. And sometimes she'd have heated mats on part of it, because with some things that are a wee bit tricky to root, if you've got bottom heat from below and you've got the mist coming on above and you haven't got bright sunlight, then they do root much better. Now I also cheat. If I'm doing something difficult, I will put my cutting trays on a little heated mat in the greenhouse, and that works well. I don't have the wonderful misting machine that she does have or did have, but I do have my little misting bottle. Now this is actually an old fertilizer bottle, but I've washed it out, used it, and now I've got water in it, and when I've done the whole tray, I'll just mist them over. Now, if again it was something a bit sensitive, that was softer leaves, that were more subject to wilt, when I put it in situ, I'm going to put these in my cold greenhouse, I might then be tempted just to put a little bit of milky polythene, if it was a bright sunny day, over the top, so I'm lessening the shock. And if it was a really sensitive one, I might actually use a totally milky bag and actually enclose it within the bag. And so you wouldn't have any air causing evaporation running over the top. Now with box cuttings, you don't even need to put them in a greenhouse. I could do these and line them out in my vegetable garden and grow them like that, and they would still root pretty well. I could put them in a cold frame or whatever. So, you know, they really are an easy subject to do. Now, when these are rooted, I'll just, you know, come sort of February, March, April, I'm just going to pick up the tray. I'll probably see that they're bursting into life and I'll see little bits of green shoots. But if I just pick up the thing, I'll see underneath the tray little white roots pointing out, and then you know it's time to pot them on. So then you just take out this little rooted plug. It will come out with the compost all together around it because the roots are holding it in. And then I'll either get a bigger pot, probably something like a 9 centimetre pot. This looks like a 3 litre to me, so it'll be a little pot. And I'll either pot the rooted plug into the pot, or much easier, I'll just line them out in my hoarding borders where I grow on all my baby plants before moving into the big wide world of the garden proper. I probably wouldn't plant them out in the exact hedging position when they were just rooted liners, because they are a wee bit vulnerable and they need a bit more space and light. I don't want them competing with all the neighbouring thugs that would be around them if I put them straight in position. So that's really box plants rooting, but we did have another pre-submitted question, and this was from Selena. Hello, Selena. And she says, I've never taken cuttings before. What are the easiest ones to start with? Well, I mean, once you get into taking cuttings, you watch it, Selena, because it is extremely addictive. You just see how easy it is to get many plants. And instead of just having one, you go to a garden centre and you think, my God, that's £8 for that plant. You can root 20 cuttings of it, and in no time at all, you've got maybe 15 or maybe more really nice little plants. So it is addictive, and what's more, you can see a lovely plant in a friend's garden. Instead of having to trot off and find who sells it, you can ask them nicely, and if they give you a cutting, you can go and take the exact same plant. So it is addictive, but if I were you, I would start with willows. Now, they have pre-formed root initials. So that means that when you just break off a bit of willow, and you could take a stick of willow this big, and you could do it in autumn, winter, or you could do it later, and you just stick it in the ground, you'll find that next spring it will be growing away. I was working on a garden near the seaside, where was it? Somewhere in East Anglia. And there was a skip full of beautiful willow, and they'd done this amazing green stemmed woven willow hedge in the next door garden to the one that I was working from, and they'd shoved all their excess willow into the skip, and it'd been there for a couple of weeks, so it looked really desiccated and dried out. So well, I'll try it because it's just such a nice green willow. So I took a load in the car, shoved it in my hoarding border in the veg garden, and it's rooting really nicely. I probably watered it twice in this dry summer, and it's still managed. So that is the easiest one in the world to do. But also softwood cuttings are very, very easy, or very, very quick and easy. I mean, I've got some in the greenhouse now. I've got some verbena, which you can take really any time from when the new growth starts right up till now and later. If you had some lovely pelargoniums now that you wanted to save over winter and you wanted to increase, you could just take some cuttings now and pop them in, and then they could stay in their rooted trays as sort of little, because they'll root pretty fast, over winter. And they always seem much hardier when they're just little rooted cuttings in a cold greenhouse. Whereas if you actually have a pelargonium, a big pelargonium at colder temperatures, it doesn't seem to withstand them so well as little cuttings seem to withstand them. And the softwood cuttings are fleshier, softer, so you have to make sure you don't leave them out in the sunlight like I'm leaving these boxes now. You just whip them in, maybe put them under the milky bag or a clear bag in a greenhouse or a cold frame. And I never, again, with those, bother with that. And then, Selena, when you get keen, you might invest in a hydropod, which is what I've just done now. I bought this lovely machine, and basically it sprays you. It has a water basin in the bottom, and then there's a tray that sits on top of the water basin, and it's got little sponge discs in the tray with a slit in the sponge discs, and you take your cutting and you shove it in the sponge disc, and then you turn it on, and it heats the water if you get the heated version, and it mists those stems. The stems are just sitting in air, but the mist is spraying over them, and it mists them. And I was amazed because last week, just 7 days ago, I put in a load of different cuttings. I put in a really nice hydrangea that I love. I put in a solanum. I put in verbena. I put in some box. And already after 7 days, quite a few of them have got nice little roots. The box hasn't yet got little roots, but I would expect this to be slower, but I'll keep watching it. And I've cheated it a bit, because although you're meant to put one cutting per sponge disc, I've tried putting a bundle of cuttings in some of them, 3 or 4 or 5, so I can get more plants in there. I mean, some things like mulberry, they always say is best rooted in bundles, so it's not mad to try that. And I can't see any reason why it won't work. Obviously, they might all get knitted up as they root through with each other, so when I pull them apart, I'll do it quite carefully so I don't break up all the roots. But it's great. I mean, if you're a cutting enthusiast, you can't beat something like that, because it just means it makes it much easier. So even more difficult subjects, I mean, something like Daphne is quite difficult to root. So that, I think, will be a cinch with this. The problem is that I'll be giving people plants that they never knew they wanted for the next God knows how long as their presents. They'll be inundated with my treasures, and they'll probably think, oh my God, not another plant from Bunny. But still, it is a great present to take when you go out to supper. It's better than the odd bottle of wine, I think. Anyway, so there we are. They're the box cuttings. I hope you don't discard box because of box blight. There is a good way around it, and we can sort out the box moth, and I just think it's such a wonderful plant. I think it would be a big shame if people didn't carry on growing it. In the next video, I'll be showing you what I call my truggery, a great combination of flowers, fruit and vegetables that not only feed us, but also produce a show-stopping garden for all.